who is also a retired undercover FBI agent, now make their home with us right here in Beaufort, where Dana is at work on her fourth novel when she's not fishing or participating in our local chapter of the Pulpit Queens Book Club, or teaching writing workshops for us at the Conroy Center or the Bluffton Book Festival or any number of other literary organizations. Dana was also one of the guests on season 3 of the Telly Award-winning ETV series By the River, which is filmed right here in Beaufort. She is a masterful storyteller and a wonderful friend to the Conroy Center and to our Low Country literary community. I'm well beyond thrilled to welcome my friend Dana to the amazing experience that is Booked Sandwich Inn. Welcome, Dana.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. After that introduction, I'm kind of afraid to speak. That was such a wonderful introduction. I don't want to mess anything up after that. But thank you. I appreciate the introduction by Jonathan. I appreciate being here. And thank you to the Beaufort County Library System, because our libraries, of course, are so important. And I grew up going to libraries. So I'll do anything for the library. I love libraries. So thank you for having me. I appreciate being here. Well, I guess you want to hear about the book. My last book, which we're here to talk about, is Below the Radar. But as Jonathan said, most of the books, I've written a series of books. They're the Lexi Montgomery series, and they are loosely based on my undercover experiences. I spent 21 years as an FBI agent, and out of that time, I spent the majority of the time as an undercover agent in some form or fashion, whether I was working long-term undercover cases or doing what we call quick hits, where I would go in and perhaps like buy drugs and then in and out, something like that. But I was fortunate enough in my FBI career to work 2 long-term undercover cases. And what long-term means is exactly that. You're under for years at a time. You don't come out. You're 24/7. You live the identity of your alias. It's not like you go to work and then after 8 or 10 hours, you go home at the end of the day and you're back to being yourself. You're emerged into this alias, and this is what you live 24/7. So that's what I did. And I was lucky enough to do that for 2 long-term cases. My first one lasted 4 years, and my second one lasted 3 years. And both of those long-term cases had to do with the extremist organization, Animal Liberation Front, Earth Liberation Front. And the reason I was picked for the cases, I guess, originally was I looked younger than what I was. My supervisor came to me and said, "We have the perfect case for you. You look younger than what you are, and you could be a hippie. You'll fit right in with these people." And that was it. The next thing you know, I was in undercover school training to be an undercover operative. And I did. I went on to spend approximately almost 7 years undercover doing the extremist cases. So that's where the books came from. I wrote the first book when I was still working. The last year and a half of on the job, I was writing Behind the Mask. And I didn't know it at the time, but Behind the Mask was therapy. It was a way of kind of getting all of that out. And by putting it on paper, I was going through a therapy session and had no idea that that's what I was doing. But writing Behind the Mask helped me to kind of clear out some of the baggage that I'd been carrying, because I always say when I worked an undercover case, I lost a little bit of myself with every case that I worked, because you're becoming this other person, and it's impossible for that not to change a person on the inside. It just is. I mean, sometimes you come out a little bit better, a little bit worse, but you always come out different. So by writing Behind the Mask, that was kind of therapy. It was a standalone book. I kind of thought it would be the only book. I had no idea I'd go on to write a series of books. But once I finished that, I was in love. I was in love with writing. And I always wanted to write a book about the Low Country. So I'm a huge Pat Conroy fan, and I love everything about the Low Country and all of the books written about the Low Country. So that's where Beyond the Cabin came from. It was my love story to the Low Country. The book is Lexi Montgomery, and she's on another undercover mission, but it's all set in the Low Country, South Carolina. So that's where that book came from. But now what we're talking about today, Below the Radar. I love to talk about this book because it's so much fun. The origins of this book, it probably is more fun than any of the other 3 books, because this book is where I met, well, I actually was dating my husband at the time, but it was the first time that we had gone undercover together as a couple. We were dating a romantically involved couple, playing a couple undercover. It's a little convoluted, I know, but it worked out. The FBI at first didn't like the idea because they thought 24/7, you guys would kill each other. Well, we talked them into it, and it turned out that not only we did not kill each other, we decided that after working undercover for 3 consecutive years together, that marriage would be a cakewalk. And so we got married afterwards. So for the first time, Lexi Montgomery in the third book has a male partner. And that is because Bill and I worked a case together. It was an animal extremist case. And we ended up traveling to the Netherlands on this case. Our subjects came to us one day and they started talking about attending a camp together. Would we like to go to camp? Well, I will tell you, when you're in the world of domestic terrorism, when people start talking about camp, they're not talking about summer camp. They're talking about something way more serious. So we went to the Bureau and said, look, we think these people are going to be attending terrorist training camp and we have the opportunity to go. Can we do this? And so lo and behold, we ended up traipsing across the world. Our targets that we were going with couldn't go straight into the Netherlands. So we ended up doing this crazy journey where we were in Ireland for a while and sleeping in squat houses and all this kind of crazy stuff before we ever even got to the Netherlands. And then once we got to the Netherlands, we were backpacking and living in an anarchist camp. And this went on for like 10 days in this camp, going to this training camp. And I will tell you, 10 days without a shower is not glamorous. We did not look beautiful at the end of this. We smelled worse than we looked. It was something that I look back and I think, wow, what a great experience. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. But it was crazy. I mean, we didn't hardly have any backup. We barely had boots on the ground in a foreign country, and there we were in a terrorist training camp. So I took all of that real life experience and put it in Below the Radar. And that means, of course, that Lexi had a partner that came on to the scene, and his name is Blake Bennett. And I had trouble when I was writing the book originally, writing the character of Blake. And one day my husband sat down, he says, why are you having trouble with this character? And I said, I don't know, none of the rest of the characters giving me trouble. And he figured it out. He goes, I know exactly what it is. He says, you think that people are going to look at Blake and think it's me. And I said, well, it kind of is you, And he says, well, you've got to write the character. No matter how bad, warts and all, you have to write the character. And then you just go and you tell people all the good things about Blake Bennett or him are true. That's really Bill. And anything bad about Blake Bennett was just strictly fiction. It was all made up. So I always have to tell people that, because sometimes Blake doesn't come across as the greatest of people. But my husband, on the other hand, he's a wonderful human being. And so I don't want anybody to think that Blake's warts are Bill's, that's for sure. So that's how the characters came about for Below the Radar. It is fiction, though. It's based on a lot of true life things. I will tell you, anything in the book that happens that's funny really happened. Anything that has to do with embarrassment, anything funny, embarrassing, yeah, that all happened. I took all the real life stuff and put it in. It was just too good to leave out. So that's how that happened. But let's see, what else? The trio is great. I loved writing all 3 of the books. And people always say, do you have a favorite? That's hard to say. It's like picking a favorite child. If I did have to pick the favorite, I would probably say Beyond the Cabin, just because it's my low country book. And it was the easiest of the 3 to write because it just flowed so quickly. And I have a couple of characters in there that I just dearly love. But all 3 of the books, I did enjoy writing. I try to write every day. I am working on a 4th book. The 4th book is not a Lexi Montgomery book, though. I am changing genres for my 4th book. It's started kind of out as a women's fiction, but it's kind of turned into women's fiction / adventure. It's kind of turned into a little bit more adventure book. I say it's The Big Chill meets Wild. It's all set on the Appalachian Trail, and it's about a group of friends that have been friends since high school, but they're all in their mid-50s. And as you know, when you get to a certain age, your body doesn't respond quite as well as it did when you're in 20. So it has a lot of funny moments, but it also has, it deals with grief, betrayal, and just coming to terms with life at a certain age and the things that we all have to deal with. So that's kind of what the fourth book I'm working on. And I will say that the Below the Radar, the third book that we're here talking about today, has been adapted for television series. Now it hasn't been bought yet. We're just in the early phases of shopping it. But this poor book has been turned into a television adaptation like 2 different times. The first time I had a male partner, and he was a wonderful partner, really great guy, but he kind of turned it into an action film. So my new partner that I've been working with for about the last 6 or 7 months that we've written the pilot I think we've captured the true essence of Lexi for the television show. And I really hope it gets bought because I think it's a wonderful adaptation, and it keeps the story more aligned with women empowerment and Lexi's strength. And it's not just an action hero kind of story now. It deals with, it's a little more complicated. My writing partners managed to bring out some of the story and a little bit more of, I guess, a little bit more in depth from some of the characters. And of course, being an adaptation, we had some new characters pop up, which I think everybody will like. And we've also have like a female villain for the adaptation, which I think is fun. You don't see a lot of female villains. So I think that's going to be a good time. But anyway, I'm happy to answer any kind of questions or talk more about the undercover life, whatever anybody would like to hear. I will tell you, I just pulled a section from Below the Radar. It's kind of towards the end. You don't really have to know a lot about it, except for the fact that Lexi is in a terrorist training camp, and she finds herself a little bit over her head. In fact, the body count's starting to add up, and she realizes she's got to get the heck out of there or she's going to be next in line. So that's the section that I'm about to read. I'm just going to read a short segment. The scratched up Timex on Lexi's wrist told her it was a little after 2 a.m, time to run. She pulled back the wool blanket and slowly sat up. Heavy breathing emanated from both corners of the tent, reassuring her that her tent mates were both sound asleep. Easing out of bed, she grabbed her pack and quietly tiptoed out of the tent. She stood still, waiting to see if either one of the women stirred. When neither did, Lexi took off at a brisk walk. She ducked into a tent that housed the cell phones, but found that all the equipment containers were now locked. Should have seen that one coming. With no means of communication, she exited the tent and quietly crept down the trail that led to the dirt road, staying as close to the tree line as possible. In the dark, she could barely make out the lone patrol keeping watch over the only road in and out of the camp. She crouched among the trees, making herself as small as possible while keeping an eye on the guard. She needed to come up with a new plan of escape. She couldn't go through the woods because she'd make too much noise. As she considered her options, the unthinkable happened. The patrol officer suddenly stopped, turned, then moved at a brisk pace in her direction. Did he hear me? If he finds me, I'm dead. What do I do? She remained completely still, trying desperately to control her breathing. Her legs were numb from crouching. As the patrol officer moved closer, she recognized him. She knew that she was no match for Victor's superior size and strength. Please don't stop. Please don't stop. Victor charged up the hill, holding his automatic rifle. He stopped a few yards from Lexi's hiding spot and cocked his head as if listening for sounds. He knows I'm here. What am I going to do? He's armed. I may be able to outrun him, but I can't outrun his bullets.
So I was listening when Jonathan was talking about your background, but I have to say it kind of went in one ear and out the other. Did he say you have a law degree?
I did. Back when I was trying to get in the FBI. Now, getting in the FBI was kind of funny. I wanted to go in the FBI since I was a small child. I grew up in a law enforcement home, but when I went to a band field trip when I was in high school, I think I was a sophomore in high school, I was 15, we visited the FBI headquarters, and that was it. I knew right then and there I was going to be an FBI agent. It's all I ever wanted. So I went to the FBI recruiter back when I was in college. I wasn't old enough to even get in the FBI because you have to be 23. And they were telling me, go to law school, go to law school, go to law school. So because the FBI back then, they were recruiting lawyers and accountants, that's why they pushed the law school. So yeah, I went to law school to get in the FBI, had no desire to ever be a lawyer. I was graduating law school, I guess it was like 92, 93, right around that. And I had interviewed with the Bureau. I was finally old enough to get into the FBI. And the federal job freeze hit all the way across the board. FBI, DEA, all the federal agencies had a job freeze right when I was graduating, right when I was planning on entering the FBI. So they said, well, you know what, this could last just a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, go get a job, whatever. So I graduated from law school and moved to South Carolina because I knew I'd always wanted to live in. We had been coming to South Carolina since I was a small child, and that's where I wanted to live. So I went ahead and made the move to South Carolina, took the South Carolina bar because this job freeze just kept going on and going on and going on. It ended up going on for 3 years. Yep. So I ended up practicing law for a short time in Georgetown, South Carolina. And then finally the job freeze lifted, and I finally got that call one day, and that was like 1995. And they said, job freeze is lifted. We have good news and bad news. Good news is we're hiring again. The bad news is you have to go back through all of the procedures, retake the test and redo the psychological and all that. So, but it was a small price to pay to finally make the dream come true and get in the FBI Academy. So finally made it to the FBI Academy at the end of 1995. And my first office was Mobile, Alabama. It's kind of funny when you're in the FBI Academy, they ask you to list all of the FBI offices. There's 56 of them total, and you rank them in order 1 through 56, where you want to go. Number 1, of course, being your number 1 choice. Mm-hmm. So when I was contemplating that list, I thought, where do I want to go and where do I really not want to go? I figured those were the most important, the top 10 and the bottom 10. So I ranked my top 10. And then I decided all those cold, awful places with high cost of living and lots of people were going to be at the bottom of the list. So I ranked all the southern offices. South Carolina was number 1. Ranked all those at the top. New York, Detroit, New Jersey, all those were at the bottom. Sorry, people from those areas, but I don't do snow. I don't do ice. So that's how that came to be. So when I got my orders, I got my 8th choice. It was Mobile, Alabama. Second smallest field division in the whole FBI. And if I would have known what I know about it now, it would have been probably number 1. It was the greatest experience out of the FBI Academy that anybody could have ever asked for. It was a wonderful small office. The support people treated me like family. I was young, unmarried, single, and I never had a holiday where they didn't take me to somebody's house. They were always trying to introduce me to their sons and grandsons, all that situation. But it was a lovely experience. It was a fantastic experience because it being a retirement office and me being a new agent, all the old guys didn't want to do all the work anymore. So I got to do anything I wanted to do. And that's how I ended up on the evidence response team. And I was ended up the team leader. I started out as assistant team leader, and then I got the team leader job the week of 9/11. So my first job as a brand new team leader was to take my team to New York in response to 9/11. So you talk about biting off more than you can chew.
Wow.
So that was quite an experience. But thank goodness, I had an experienced team to lead, and they made it easy. And it was probably one of the greatest things I ever did as an FBI agent. It was sad, it was horrible, but I felt like I was doing the work of the Bureau, and that's what I was meant to do. So as hard as it was to try to retrieve human remains and do that kind of stuff, it was in a way helpful to know that I was giving a family some type of closure, to know that their family member, they had something to bury at that point, at least. So that's kind of the way I had to look at it, was I was giving closure to a lot of families in need.
That's incredible. You said your parents were in law enforcement?
My father was in law enforcement. He was local police, and he was a sheriff county sheriff in Kentucky. So I did grow up in a law enforcement family. And then he went all the way up. He was actually deputy marshal, assistant deputy marshal for a while too. So I think he did all kinds of every branch there was to do, he did.
Yeah.
So when I was interested in law enforcement, he was the one that said, at least you're looking at the Bureau. If you're going to do this, go in the FBI. So he was happy that I chose the FBI. He was unhappy I chose to leave law, though. He wanted a lawyer instead of a law enforcement officer.
Well, it sounds like it worked out for you. We had a comment from Jeannie at the USCB library, and I don't know if Jeannie, I assume she can hear me, but she said your book is at the USCB library, which is right next door to the Center for the Performing Arts. And Jeannie, if you could just say, does everybody who lives in Beaufort County can you check books out of the USCB library with what? A regular library card, a driver's license, what? She's not answering. Well, okay. Does anybody else know the answer to that question? Okay, she can't seem to unmute. So we'll wait for her. Maybe she'll type an answer.
I'm working on it, sorry.
And also, is there a Kindle version available?
Are you talking about the library or Kindle version in general?
Amazon Kindle, yeah.
Yes, there is a Kindle version. Actually, all 3 books are available on Kindle, and they're also an audiobook too. And if you're on Audible, that was a fun experience. My narrator is Kate Marson. You probably recognize her voice. I think she does a lot of Toyota ads and things like that. I'll walk through the house sometimes when my husband has a TV on. I'm like, oh, there's Kate, but she is a wonderful narrator. And she has narrated all 3 of the Lexi Montgomery books. So they are on Audible as well as ebooks and then paperback as well.
Huh. Okay, I've got a comment here. Everybody can check out books. You need to get a USCB ID card, and that can be done at the campus. It's free. It just takes a couple of minutes to get the card. So that's good to know. And I will say on Jeannie's behalf, she's been involved with the Friends for many, many years. And she is the, I think, assistant director, library director at USCB Beaufort. And they have a great collection. We often don't think about going into that library, but it's there and it's available. And she always orders the book sandwiched in books every year. So that's very nice of her to do that.
Well, that's great to know too. I didn't know that either. I have a library card, but that's good to know.
Yeah.
I might have to pop in over there and
yeah. Okay, so Jonathan says, Dana, as a retired FBI agent and a writer of FBI stories, what do you see other writers get wrong most often?
Oh, we could be here for hours. I'll go through a couple of my few pet peeves, okay? Oh yeah, I teach an entire class on this, on what writers get wrong. I will tell you that with the FBI, most people get wrong that the FBI does not ever swoop in and take cases away from the locals. Every television series and movies and books, you see that they swoop in, they just kick the little guy aside and take over the case. Does not happen. The FBI has to have one jurisdiction. And if there's no federal jurisdiction to work the case, then they can't take over the case to begin with. And homicide is a situation that's a local case. There's no federal jurisdiction for homicide unless it was in the commission of a bank robbery or say on a military base or something like that to make it a federal crime. So all these cases where you see the FBI working homicides right off the bat, that's a fallacy. The other thing is I hate that they have the FBI agents running around working serial killers. Serial killers have become a bona fide genre for some reason. And they always have the FBI chasing all the serial killers. The FBI has a behavioral assessment unit in Virginia where we do assist, and we have all of our profilers there. We assist local agencies, state agencies, anybody that needs the profiling unit. The FBI is always happy to help. But those profilers very rarely hit the streets and actually knock on doors and do interviews and things like that. That is a unit that provides advice. And then the local agencies are the ones that put that advice into motion in the form of doing different kinds of interviews, that sort of thing. And I, as an agent, we used the profiling unit quite a few times because I did work violent crime. So I worked hand in hand with the police, mainly when I was in the Mobile division. And they're a great source, but it's a completely travesty to see an FBI agent running amok on the streets of New York or wherever, chasing some serial killer on his own. And then crazy stuff just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in really what the FBI profiler units do, I will tell you something that's very good. It's on Netflix. It's the origins of the FBI profiling unit. It's a great show. It's called Mindhunter. They're based on John Douglas's books. And I've always been a fan of John Douglas. He was kind of a mentor person when I was young. And that's what I wanted to do when I went in the FBI. I will tell you, honestly, when I went in the FBI, I was going to be a profiler. That's all I wanted to do. I wanted to chase serial killers. See, I'd watched way too many TV shows and movies and read too many books about this. And I thought that's what the FBI did. In fact, that's what I thought all the FBI did. Boy, it was a rude awakening in the FBI Academy. And I found out what white collar crime was and healthcare fraud and all that stuff that the FBI worked. And I thought, oh my goodness, what have I done? This looks really boring. So.
Okay, so I have a couple more questions for you. These are good. Two things. What was your scariest moment? And were you ever close to being discovered or uncovered? And how did you handle it, if so?
Okay, scariest moment was probably not as an undercover agent. My scariest moment was when I was working. My second office, my first office was Mobile. My second office was down in the Caribbean. I was an agent in the St. Croix Resident Agency, which is out of Puerto Rico. Our office, of course, is on the island of St. Croix, small office, 50,000 people. The local gang there decided they were going to kill all the FBI, all the federal agents. We had hits out on us, and we went everywhere with two guns most of the time, not just one, two. You should see me carrying a long weapon. I'm 5'2", and so I'd have a gun on my hip and then an MP5 strung over my shoulder. I mean, crazy stuff, but I look like Rambo. But during that time, we had one of our task force agents was targeted. He was shot up in his truck. Turns out he wasn't driving. It was Dad that was shot. He put like 40 rounds through the vehicle. We had an informant that was killed. Same thing, AK-47 attack, by several people, just shot the whole vehicle up. I always said, every time I shut my eyes at night, the thing that I pictured was blood coming out of the bottom of a car, because I'd seen it so many times. There was so much blood coming out of the bottom of the car that's what I pictured every night. So my scariest moment was right after our task force agent's father was shot. I got a call from the DEA agent that was my neighbor. He goes, come on, something's happened. We jump in the car to leave. It's the middle of the night, and a car rolls up behind us with no headlights on. And this was their way they had known to attack, is they roll out with 6 or 7 guys, all with AKs, and they just shoot everything in sight. So I look over at Brian, and he and I were thinking the same thing. We're like, this is it. And I said, well, we're not going out without fight, and he's like, nope, let's do it. So, we figured we both had semi-automatic. We were going to get off as many of those rounds as we had before they got us. Turns out the car kept rolling, got right past us. It was a guy that was basically cheating on his wife. And, but I looked over at him, and he goes, I'm going to drive when my legs work again. And I said, yeah, I know, me too. So, but that every single day during that time period was like that. I mean, it was always like, you never knew when somebody was going to come out from behind a tree, or you never knew going in when you had to stop at the gate to punch in your code, if that was the ambush point and this was it. Because on an island of 50,000 people, they knew what we drove, they knew where we lived, they followed us home. that sort of thing. So that was probably my scariest, I will say, time period. And I was there 7 years. So, but when working with undercover, yes, we were discovered. It was when Bill and I were working together. And that was why we were moved. We were living in California. We were assigned to the Los Angeles division. And then we were discovered. And it wasn't because of our fault. It really wasn't anybody's fault, but I guess it was an attorney had applied for Freedom of Information Act for 200 of the extremists, the activists. And one of those extremists that got a hold of the Freedom of Information Act was a target that I had worked by myself in an earlier case, my first undercover case. Case was closed, but what they don't realize, this is just some poor person making minimum wage, kind of going through and things. They don't realize that all of these people are connected. The cells don't necessarily know what other cells are doing, but they know each other and they know who's involved as far as that goes. So when this woman up in Northern California got the report, it was single source information. She read it and she said, I know exactly who this is. I know who's reporting on me and I know where she is. So she picked up the phone and called the people down in LA and said, I don't know if she's an agent or if she's a snitch, but she's reporting to the FBI. So we had to make a quick exit and we were transferred from California to Florida. It doesn't get any further apart than that, I guess, so that's how we ended up in my last office, which was Orlando, Florida. We were stationed in Orlando, and that was an office out of Tampa. So that's where I kind of ended up the career. And then my last year and a half, I ended up at the FBI Academy.